Here we go. So today we're going to estimate with two-digit divisors. So on your whiteboard, I want you to write this problem, 343 divided by 54 on the left side, and then on the other side, you're going to write the exact same problem because we're going to focus on two estimates. So take a moment to write that in on both sides, and then draw a squiggly line right down the middle to divide the problem. So we're going to start with the left side, and we're going to focus on our first estimate. So the first thing you're going to do is you're going to take this divisor, 54, and round to the nearest 10. That's going to create a very compatible number, a very friendly number, and that's also going to be how we estimate. So the nearest 10 to 54 is 50 because 4 or less, so it stays the same. So you're going to end up with 50. Now over here, you're going to end up with the same thing, 50. So that's kind of step number one, is to round that divisor to the nearest 10. Now we're going to look at just the 5, and we're going to focus on the first two digits of the dividend, the 3 and the 4. So we want to ask ourselves, how can we get 5 to equal 34? In other words, 5 times what gives us 34 or near 34? So right off the top of my head, I know that 5 times 6 gives us 30. So I'm going to write that here. But we have this 3 left over. So when you bring that down, that 3 becomes a 0. So now on your whiteboard, you should have 300 divided by 50. Now the final step is to use mental math to divide. So ask yourself, how many times does 5 go into 30? The answer is 6. So that takes care of that. So now you have a 0 left in your divisor, but you also have 1 in the dividend. So your quotient becomes 6. Now if we zoom out and look over here, we now want to come up with our second estimate. So 54 is already 50. We're good there. And now we want to figure out, since we've already used 300, or 5 times 6 is 30, and we added the 0, we want to go the next number up. So if we do 5 times 7, and we're just focusing on the first two digits, 5 times 7 gives me 35, and that's very close to 34. Now you might be asking, but Mr. Pewitt, why can't we do 34? 5 cannot be multiplied to give you 34. Now we can't forget this 3, which when we drop it down, it becomes a 0. So on your whiteboard, you should now have 350 divided by 50. Now 5 goes into 35 7 times. So we can cross that out. And if we have 1 0 in one number and in another number, those can cancel out. So we end up with 7. Now if we zoom out, our two estimates are 6 and 7. These are very reasonable answers because they're similar, 6 and 7. All right. Take a moment, go ahead and erase your whiteboard, and let's try our second problem before we tackle our big 8. So on both sides of your board, you're going to write the following division problem. 1,578 divided by 42. Write that on both sides, and then put a squiggly line down the middle. Now let's focus on our first estimate. We're going to look at that 42, and we're going to round it to the nearest 10. And that's how we're going to estimate that number. So the nearest 10, that's right, would be 40. So we're going to have 40 on both sides. Now let's focus on our first estimate. Now that we have the divisor rounded, we're going to focus on the first two digits of the dividend. And we want to ask ourselves, how many 4s does it take to make 15 or near 15? Well, the answer is 4 cannot turn into 15. But if I do 4 times 3, which is 12, that's pretty close to 15. So I'm going to write my 12 here, and the 7 and the 8, since we're estimating, become zeros. So now that we have our compatible numbers, we can go ahead and divide using mental math. So we're going to look at this 4 and ask ourselves, how many times does the 4 go into 12? And the answer is 3. So make sure you have that written on your whiteboard. So we've taken care of that 4 and the 12. 4 goes into 12 3 times. But we have this 0. So we have 1 0 in our divisor, which cancels out 1 0 in our dividend. And that leaves 1 0, which we're going to drop down. So our first estimate is 30. Okay, that's our first estimate. Good. Now let's look over here and try to find our second estimate. So we were able to find 4 times 3, which is 12, which is near 15, but we don't want to use the same estimate. So focusing on the first two digits of our divisor, 4 times what gives us close to 15? Remember, you want to ignore this 0 because you're just focusing on just the 4, because we can add all those zeros or take away those zeros later. I'm thinking 4 times 4 is 16, and 16 is close, very close, to 15. 16 is close to 15, and the 7 and the 8 become zeros. Because remember, we're estimating with compatible numbers. Now let's take that 4 and divide it into 16 using that mental math. 4 goes into 16 4 times. We have a 0 over here, so we can cross that out, and you'll do that on your whiteboard. Whoops, I already wrote the answer. I got ahead of myself. But anyway, that 0 would be brought down because it's the only 0 that is left. So our two estimates are 30 and 40. I hope this helped. Let's get back to our Big 8.